thank you so much, Bob. Thank you, Bill. Thank you both for your incredible principled conservative leadership. Thank you for fighting for the Constitution every day. And thank you for leading our team here in the great state of New Hampshire. You're welcome. Yeah. God bless the great state of New Hampshire. Monday night, we had an amazing victory in Iowa. Can we turn the mic up there?
Second right, turn it up.
Try it now. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. I do not like green eggs and ham. I do not like them, Sam. I am. All right, is that better? Can people hear with that? Well, Monday night, we had a pretty remarkable victory in Iowa. You know, for everyone watching the TV news the night before, the pundits said over and over again, we couldn't win. Every pundit on every TV station said Cruz would lose. Every pundit said Trump was going to win, Trump was going to win, Trump was going to win. I remember I was watching Hannity. He had 6 experts. The 6 experts' predictions, Trump, 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 Trump. Yeah. But then Monday night, the people of the great state of Iowa had something different to say about it. We saw an incredible victory for the grassroots. An incredible victory for courageous conservatives rising up. And what the people of Iowa did is they put the country on notice. The media is not going to pick the Republican nominee or the next president of the United States. The pundits aren't going to pick the next president. The lobbyists aren't going to pick the next president. The Washington establishment isn't going to pick the next president. But rather, we, the people, will select the next president. And what was so encouraging is we saw the old Reagan coalition coming back together. We saw conservatives and evangelicals and libertarians and Reagan Democrats all coming together and standing in one in a record turnout. The people of Iowa said, we want a proven, consistent conservative. We want someone who's walked the walk. We want someone who we know and trust will stand and defend the Constitution of the United States. You know, polling shows that more than half of Americans believe that our kids will have worse lives than we did. 65%. I am convinced that the central issue of 2016, of this election, is reigniting the promise of America. Getting back to that central ideal that our kids will have a better life than we did, and their kids will have a better life than they did. The first time in history, in over 2 centuries of our nation's history, it has never been the case that people thought their kids would have a worse life than they did until right now. That is how profoundly off track we are. So how do we turn it around? How do we reignite the promise of America? It's real simple. We get back to the principles that built America and made America great in the first place. Nice thing about eternal truths, they're always true. Number 1, we bring back jobs and growth and opportunity. My number 1 priority in the Senate, my number 1 priority as president is economic growth. Why? Because growth is foundational to everything else. You want to turn around unemployment. You want to pay down the debt. You want to rebuild and strengthen the military. You want to strengthen and preserve Social Security and Medicare. You got to have growth. With growth, we can do all of that. Without growth, we can't do any of it. And the people here, we understand cause and effect. We understand that every time we go down the road we're going down right now, the result is misery and stagnation and malaise. That's what happens with out-of-control spending and taxing and regulation. That's where it goes. And by the way, Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, their solution is double down on more of the same. We need yet more taxes, more spending, more regulation, and you know what? We'll get even more of the misery and stagnation and malaise. Right. It doesn't work. But we also understand the flip side, that every time the federal government pursues tax reform and regulatory reform, every time we take the boot of the federal government off of the back of the necks of small businesses, we see incredible economic growth. Small businesses are the heart of our economy. 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses. You want to hammer job growth, hammer small businesses like we've seen for 7 years. On the flip side, if you want to see incredible job growth, unleash small businesses. Make it easier for small businesses to grow and create jobs. Regulatory reform, the most important regulatory reform, is we need to repeal every word of Obamacare. Obamacare is the biggest job killer in this country. Millions of Americans have lost their jobs, have been forced into part-time work, have lost their health care, their doctors have seen their premiums skyrocket. Here in New Hampshire, premiums have gone through the roof because of Obamacare. If I'm elected president, we will repeal every word of it, and we will pass common sense health care reform that makes health insurance personal and portable and affordable and keeps government from getting in between us and our doctors. And then tax reform. The simplest and best tax reform is we should adopt a simple flat tax where every American can fill out our taxes on a postcard.
Yeah.
And when we do that, we should abolish the IRS. The second key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to defend our constitutional rights. All of them, instead of the federal government violating the Bill of Rights. The Constitution and Bill of Rights are not a rough draft. They're not suggestions. We need a president who defends the First Amendment, who defends free speech, and especially religious liberty. You want to understand just how off track we are? You need look no further than the Little Sisters of the Poor. Little Sisters of the Poor are a Catholic charity of nuns who've taken vows of poverty. They spend their lives caring for the poor and the elderly. Right now today, the Obama administration is litigating against the Little Sisters, trying to impose millions of dollars of fines on them in order to force the nuns to pay for abortion-inducing drugs and others. Now, let me give you all a real simple rule of thumb. If you're litigating against nuns, you've probably done something wrong. If I'm elected president on the very first day in office, I will instruct the Department of Justice and the IRS and every other federal agency that the persecution of religious liberty ends today.
Yeah. Right.
We need to defend the Second Amendment, the right to keep and bear arms.
Yeah!
And let me tell you, the Second Amendment, it's not about hunting. It's not about skeet shooting or target shooting. Those are fun, but that's not why the Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment is in the Bill of Rights because if anyone comes into your home at night and seeks to harm your family and seeks to harm your children, then every one of us has a right to defend our home and defend our family and to defend our children. Just a couple of weeks ago, President Obama issued yet more illegal executive actions trying to undermine the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. If I'm elected president on the very first day in office, the first thing I will do is rescind every single illegal and unconstitutional executive action taken by President Obama. We need to defend the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, our rights to privacy. How many of y'all have your cell phones? But let me ask you to please leave your cell phones on. I want to make sure President Obama hears every word we say. We need to defend the 10th Amendment, or as President Obama calls it, the what? The fundamental protection that says the powers not given to the federal government are reserved to the states and to the people. That means there's certain responsibilities the federal government needs to do and do first. It needs to protect this nation, to keep us safe, to rebuild the military, to stand by our soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines. And we need to secure the borders and end sanctuary cities. But there are other areas that the federal government has no business sticking its nose. And chief among those is education, and we need to repeal every word of Common Core.
Yeah, do
it. The third key to reigniting the promise of America is we need to restore America's leadership in the world. For 7 years, America has receded from leadership in the world. We have abandoned our friends and allies. And we have shown weakness and appeasement to our enemies. Instead of a president who boycotts Prime Minister Netanyahu, imagine America standing unapologetically alongside the nation of Israel. We will have a commander-in-chief who stands up and says to the world, we will defeat radical Islamic terrorism. We'll have a president willing to utter the words, radical Islamic terrorism. And we will not weaken, we will not degrade. We will utterly and completely destroy ISIS. Now, some of y'all may be thinking, can this happen? Can we do it? You know, Scripture tells us there's nothing new under the sun. I think where we are today is very, very much like the late 1970s, like the Jimmy Carter administration. Same failed economic policies. Same feckless and naive foreign policy. In fact, the very same countries, Russia and Iran, openly laughing at and mocking the President of the United States. You know, the one person in America thrilled with the job Barack Obama's doing?
Barack Obama.
And Jimmy Carter. Well, and I got to tell you, by the way, some news broke today that Jimmy Carter has endorsed Donald Trump. I'm not making this up. This news broke today that Jimmy Carter gave a public speech, and he said, as between Donald Trump and Ted Cruz, I prefer Donald Trump. And Jimmy Carter said why. He said because Donald Trump is malleable. He won't stand for anything in Washington. Donald Trump will be fine. That Cruz guy actually believes this stuff, and he's going to do it. You know, in response, I may have to send Jimmy Carter a bouquet of roses. But why is it that that analogy to the late 1970s gives me so much hope and optimism? Because we remember how that story ended. All across this country, millions of men and women rose up and became the Reagan Revolution. And it didn't come from Washington. Washington despised Ronald Reagan. It came from the American people, and I'll tell you, 36 years ago, that former governor of California came to the state of New Hampshire. The media despised him. Washington despised him. The pundits all said he couldn't win, he was too conservative. Everyone knows the state of New Hampshire is never going to vote for a conservative. But the Granite State shocked the media and shocked the world, and because of the leadership of the men and women in this room, gave us our 40th President of the United States, Ronald Wilson Reagan. You want to talk about the impact New Hampshire can have? That decision, that victory in New Hampshire, literally changed the course of history, liberated billions across the globe, won the Cold War, and tore the Berlin Wall to the ground. We're at a similar moment, a similar inflection point where the stakes are just as grave. Why is it that I'm so optimistic? Because the same thing is happening again. All across this country, people are waking up. Millions of people are waking up. It took Jimmy Carter to give us Ronald Reagan. And I am convinced the most long-lasting legacy of Barack Obama is going to be a new generation of leaders in the Republican Party who stand for freedom, who stand for the Constitution, and who stand for the Judeo-Christian values that have built this great nation. And with that, I'm happy to answer or dodge any questions you like.